me okay? I can hear myself pretty good. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out, and in this weather that isn't quite so bad just yet, and maybe we're going to be right above it. And I think my microphone just died.
It just died.
What are you doing back there, Alex?
Oh, wow, he's got a spare.
I do. This, well, hey, look. Yeah, see, I'm on it. Got my A game tonight. 4 hours earlier, I promise. Yeah, it'll be fine. This is the exposure series. Okay. Thank you. I have some technical assistance. Oh, there we go. Golly, being upstaged by my production crew. All right. And just again, we're delighted to have you out here tonight. Hopefully for something that is going to be insightful, something that is going to be maybe revealing. Maybe we'll learn some things. I'm hoping to, at least. I'm just guessing that because you came out this evening that you're that kind of person. You're inquisitive. You're kind of curious about the nature of things and how things are in the world. And that's partly the reason why this exposure series was created this year. And I'm really anxious to kind of get this one started. Before we get started, though, I would like to thank a few people that made tonight possible. I'd like to thank Paul Aho and his staff at the Paducah School of Art and Design for letting us have the event here. And then Paul sitting out here in the house. Yay! Helping me prepare for this event. I'd like to thank the WKCTC Maintenance Operations Department as well as the PR and Marketing Department who are recording this event tonight. I'd like to thank the Ann Denton Endowment and the Paducah Convention and Visitors Bureau along with the Paducah Junior College Foundation. Without their support, we couldn't do the things that we do at the Clemens Fine Arts Center. So tonight, we're going to talk about truth and trust and media and how they connect or sometimes disconnect with one another. So for me, truth represents what reality is like, to be able to move around in the real world and navigate it. And I think that we have to know what the truth is about any given subject to be able to do that successfully. And I also believe that there are those that offer a substitute for the truth. And to me, that's offensive. And so the substitute sometimes undermines this fundamental principle of trust that we have in society. And this plays out all across all media types and outlets where gatekeeping, in fact, have been replaced by opinion and even the active denial of the truth. So to continue this thread and to get things started, I'd like to introduce Bob Valentine from Murray State University, and he's going to introduce the panel to everyone.
Thank you, Todd. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's discussion is going to include you. Feel free to take notes or make a mental note that you'd like to raise an issue with the panel. You're certainly welcome to. The panel, shall I eat this up? Yes. The panel consists of academics, all of whom have considerable experience in the real world of journalism and mass communication, and that's probably an important consideration. I'm going to introduce them from my right and then go all the way around the circle to the lawyer, which is oddly appropriate in this case. On my right is somebody, you hear this said from time to time, but in West Kentucky, in fact in the Commonwealth, it is probably can be said of Robert Howe McGahee III that this guy needs no introduction. He is, for 25 years, the chairman of the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication at Murray State University, even before it was called that. He is a native Kentuckian who graduated from Murray State University as its first master's candidate in mass communication before he received his doctorate at Ohio University. He has compiled an enormous list of honors and recognitions. The ones that are most pertinent tonight probably are his membership of the Kentucky Press Association Hall of Fame and his designation as the Frank Stanton Fellow of the International Radio TV Society, a recognition that generally signifies the outstanding educator in broadcast journalism in the United States of America. Doc has produced 2 generations of folks who are now leaders in broadcast, print, and digital news, and they are all across the country. Despite the fact that he needs no introduction, you just heard one. Bob McGahee. And to Doc's right is Dr. Tim Vance. Dr. Vance is a graduate of Southern Mississippi University. Is that right, Southern?
Yeah, University.
I've heard of that. Southern Mississippi, and his career has been in public relations. He operated a public relations firm that had fairly significantly sized clients such as Meharry Medical School, a number of other concerns. He's worked in public relations and understands the relationship between media and business, and most importantly, reputation and what founds a reputation. Right now, he is teaching, has been teaching in 2 different departments, political science, which is most appropriate, and now full-time in journalism and mass communication, where his expertise is in media literacy, political communication, and the effects of mass media on the electorate. Tim Vance to my far right. And on my left is Professor Kevin Qualls. Dr. Qualls holds the Juris Doctorate as well as membership in the American Bar Association, the Kentucky Bar, and he's also a member of the Virginia Bar. He received his degree from Liberty University and then immediately went to work where he had been before as a video producer. He is in charge of the video production program at Murray State University, but he is also in charge of a new pilot program that intends to provide to those who are interested in it special instruction and research in the securing of the intellectual property rights that may may be assigned to someone if they have any intellectual property. You may have some right now. He has worked as a trial attorney and has served as expert witness in cases involving pretrial publicity, when the truth may be obscured and justice may be denied. He has participated on a number of panels having to do with the First Amendment, both the execution of its power and the preservation of its liberty, and joined the faculty at Murray State University in 2008, where he was in fact coming home. Tonight, he has come home again because he has worked in Paducah here at WKCTC for quite some time. So Kevin Qualls is home, and with him comes the truth. It would be immodest of me to tell you what my mother thinks of me by way of an introduction, and would be humiliating to tell you what my father thought. My name is Robert Valentine, and I am the senior lecturer in mass communication at Murray State University. I have worked as a magazine publisher. I've worked in the fields of advertising and public relations, and I only do those things on a part-time basis so I can afford to teach at university. There are people who understand, in this room, who understand what that means. It is fun, however, and I'm going to retire from the university just as soon as I figure out how to get through to the millennials. So I'm pretty much immortal, I guess. That's going to have to be the case. I'm very intrigued as a playwright and as somebody who has edited books as well as tried to keep up with public relations releases that are bound for the press, to start with a general introduction on the subject tonight. The truth. We're not just talking about the truth, however, we're talking about the truth and trust and the media, and that's important. We should start with an understanding of the truth. We don't have one that we can share adequately because the truth has a very checkered past when it comes to an absolutely certain meaning. Traditionally, it has been called a certainty, that which is so. True north is in fact north, not slightly north, not north, north, northeast, but north. And true north, as defined by the scientist, is in fact not truly the north. But true north But truth itself, I should say, is defined by other scholars as a fact or belief that is accepted as true. And this opens up a whole realm of discussion that you may not have counted on. This is why thousands of well-trained physicians, including some of the most preeminent physicians of their age, continued to reject the germ theory of disease decades after it was absolutely and clinically proven by experiment, which cost a number of lives. And yet the profession proceeded to believe that germ theory was just that, only a theory, sort of like evolution. Benjamin Franklin, one of the most learned scientific minds of his time, believed in phlogiston theory. I'll spare you the details. He was wrong. He felt it was the truth. So truth for us may be said to have a fairly illusory nature. It has been invented as a concept for years, but it continues to be hard to lay hands on it. The assumption that there is a knowable, absolute reality is enticing, but it can sometimes be misleading. Dr. Bob Lochte, the former chairman at Murray State University, refers to three kinds of reality. He says there's reality, reality TV, and TV reality. Only one of them can kill you. And that would be reality TV, and boredom is a horrible way to go. That having been said, the truth of the physical universe we generally accept is pretty clear. That would be anvil reality. We all know that if you drop an anvil on your foot, you're going to break some bones and you will be incapacitated for a long time. That does not happen to the coyote. The Warner Brothers coyote simply sees his toes grow to enormous proportions, his eyes bug out of his head, he shakes his foot, and a few seconds later he's chasing the roadrunner again. That's not true. The truth of things political, social, and psychological, however, is even a more difficult challenge. Truth and trust are linked. The most certain truth must be trusted before it can influence what we believe and therefore our behavior. Likewise, an otherwise clear falsity, if trusted, can function like the greatest truth in the world. It can be as powerful as truth itself. This has always been so. However, today, it's probably why Todd has called us together. Things are slightly different. For the first time in human history, the gate to publication and widespread dissemination of words is open and unguarded. Today, knowledgeable use of the media to safeguard our beliefs from the power of lies has never been more important. But it is something we've been grappling with for years. And to understand the playing field in which we operate, we turn to Bob McGahey of Murray State University. Doc?
Okay. As the elder member here, I'm going to cover the history since I know it oldest anyhow. Back in 1958, there were three professors at the University of Illinois, Fred Siebert, Ted Peterson, Wilbur Schramm, and they took sessions and notes from their classes, and they got together and they put out a book called The Four Theories of the Press. And in that, they talked about the relationship with the individual, the government, and the press, and how each one affected the other. And out of that, they came up with what they said was, quote, four theories of the press. And I'll cover those very briefly. The oldest, of course, is authoritarian. In those countries, way back when, the oldest came in the late Renaissance, I guess, and right after the invention of Gutenberg's printing press. Truth was only determined by the king or the head of the church. Individuals were not seen to be able to determine truth and should be kept from having any discussion because they would lie. Not so the heads of the people. They were allowed to. The press and anything after that came was controlled. Many things they were used to control it, they first tried licensing. And then when there were so many people with a little printing press, that wouldn't work. And so they used patents and then censorship. And then today, we still have authoritarian countries. You can look in some of the African countries, South America, even over in the Europe areas. There's still some in various parts of it. Many of them still have some capitalistic form where they have private ownership, but it's definitely controlled by the state, and if you mess up, you lose. So we still have some authoritarian type systems there where it's top to bottom. The individual has no right, the state or the government controls it. Well, we flip it 180 and we go into what's known as the libertarian. Now that word's been misused a lot since we got into politics here in America, but the old libertarian theory said after the Renaissance came and that left and we had the rise of democracy and religious freedom, we had trade expanded, and Mr. Adam Smith talked about the free and open marketplace. Then everybody wanted to be in and be able to speak and trade and say and do what they wanted to. And the theory was this: as long as everybody had access to the information and everybody could go into the marketplace, Donna Raines over here could lie all she wanted to. It didn't matter because we would find out that our art director over here, he had the truth. And if we hear them all, we'll say that's the truth. She can't hurt us. And that was the theory of it. If everybody had access, man was individual, was intellectual, he could determine truth, but he had to have access. And that's how we lived with the libertarianism. So it was pretty wild, even in the early days of our colonial. The old guys, Thomas Jefferson even reacted saying, you know, those guys, they ought to be put away. But he was for the freedom of the press, but he knew that you had to put up with a lot under that system, but he felt that was best. Well, we come out of World War II, and in 1947, Henry Luce, who was the founder of Time Life, he talked to his old buddy named Hutchins, who was the chancellor of the University of Chicago. He said, Hutch, get together a commission, I'll furnish it up, we'll give you a grant, and how free are we? What's about freedom of the press? Well, they interviewed people for a couple of years, and they finally came out with a little book called Free and Responsible Press. And he said, we believe in the libertarian concept, we believe in the free and open marketplace, but it ain't happening now. With mass media, particularly broadcast, not everybody can have one, not everybody can have access to it. Therefore, and here it comes, social responsibility. It behooves the media to present a fair and balanced presentation and to seek information and present all sides. And it also had in the very back of the book, many people forget that, and if the media cease to do so, government may get in. Didn't say it that way, I paraphrase. And so we had things like Voice of America and NPR and all of that really were government funded to be in the game with the mass media. So that was our social responsibility. At the same time, we have the Soviet system, the communist system. In that, again, the individual is not seen to be able to seek truth. He can only gain it from the party. Now, the party was only supposed to be there for a little while, and they would have a straight communist system. I believe the party's still there, isn't it? They control it. Right now in Russia, there is some private ownership, but heavy censorship. So they've kind of got a little bit of that. And the Chinese now in Hong Kong, they got to stay with capitalism. They need the money. So they still have some of it. But there, the media are controlled by the government, period. Now, I'll give you a fifth one. I don't have it written down. These guys haven't heard about it. In 1970, summer of 70, I went to Ohio University to start my doctorate, and it was a National Science Foundation workshop on political communication, Tim. And we had a guy named Jack Haberstroh from San Diego State came there, and we talked about this. In fact, Wilbur Schramm came down, was one of the speakers at it. And Haberstroh says, all four of these are wrong. What we got in the United States today is we give lip service to social responsibility, but the theory should be called, give them what they want, baby. And he says, what we do in the mass media for the most part is we have to sustain ourselves, therefore we must make money, and therefore we have to give the public what it wants, not necessarily what it needs, as we would under social responsibility. So today we're in a kind of a hybrid, and our other speakers coming up here, we're going to talk about where we are in all this. What is the role of the government? What is the role of the media? What is the role of the individual? And who has what rights? And who determines the truth? Bobby?
If you want to know, Doc, we'll have to ask Tim Vance. He's going to tell us who determines the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Professor Tim Vance.
Todd, I got to stand up. Sure.
Do y'all applaud now?
Yeah. If you would. Go, y'all can stand up with me. Yeah. By the way, as old as this face is, two of these guys were my professors when I was an undergrad.
We were hoping you wouldn't say that.
But yeah, it happened. Just had to make myself feel a little younger there. I look at things a little bit differently than some other people. My training is that of, we call it the British scholars. I'm a cultural critic, not a media critic. A media critic talks about what is actually being, there's programming that is on television. I look less at what media does for you, which is social responsibility and that type of thing. I look more at what media does to you. Here's the issue. You have to use a little bit of introspection and ask yourself what you know and why do you know it. When I walk into class, a media effects class at the beginning of every semester, I'm sitting there standing with in front of a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds, and I ask them, do you know what a platypus is? Yeah, I know what a platypus is. Perry the platypus. There's a little song that goes with it. This little rodent of action or whatever it is, because he's a cartoon. And here's this thing, it's a little rodent-like mammal with a duck beak and webbed feet and a beaver tail that lays eggs in water. What a bunch of hooey. There's no way that this exists in real life. But they all know what a platypus is. Have you ever seen one? No, they say. They've never seen a platypus. Well, how do you know it exists? I saw one on TV. I saw it on TV. I saw a zombie last night. It was on the same channel, in fact. So how do I know the zombie isn't real, but the platypus is? How do I know that one news story is real, but the next one isn't? And that's the problem of a cultural critic. We have to look and see what information you're given, how it's interpreted, where you're getting it from, and what you're doing with it. So a lot of this has to do with representation and interpretation. For example, I spent the first half of my life north of the Mason-Dixon line. I spent the second half of my life south of the Mason-Dixon line. So if I get all of my old friends together, put them in one room, and tell them that I had grits for dinner last night, I have half of that group going, ew. And the other half is going, And it's the same sentence. Now, we look at selective exposure issues and things of that nature. And what I'm talking about here, the reason I bring this stuff up is because everything is open to interpretation. And these interpretations are based on the history that you have as an individual. If you grew up in the South, grits are good. If you grew up north, grits are some nasty, vile, grainy food that you don't want to have anything to do with, right? So, there are a lot of common political things in the news right now. Immigration, healthcare reform, gun rights, war on terrorism, all that kind of thing. What we have to decide is whether or not the rhetoric matches the facts. And that's where cultural criticism comes in. There's truth, objective truth, if there is such a thing as objective truth. And then there's subjective truth, which is what most of us are more familiar with, right? I posit that as a member of the School of Cultural Studies and a cultural critic, if you will, that there's a war on science, and it's a battlefield where ideology overrides statistical data. And that's a problem, We live in a culture that believes that you need an AR-15 for home protection. Now, I want you to think about that a minute. I'm not advocating gun rights or anti-gun rights or whatever. This is not a political or religious forum. I'm just putting this out there. But I want you to think about the logic of a weapon that can find its target from more than 3/4 of a mile away being used to protect your average living room. Is that logical? Does that make any sense at all? Mass media, the gun lobby, the news has made sensationalism sells news. We know that. Yellow journalism of the early 20th century sold newspapers. And I'm willing to put forth, and I'm going to be argued with by the rest of my panel here, I'm saying that yellow journalism has come full circle. And we're using it again in order to maintain audience numbers and rating points, right? So let me just give you a couple of examples here. If I do a lot of surveys for research and media research and that type of thing, and one of the things in political science as well as media research that I ask people is what the biggest fear that you have is. What's the biggest concern right now for the American public? What do we need to be afraid of? And almost universally, it's terrorism, right? We're afraid of terrorism. That's why we have 2-hour-long lines in airports. That's why I'm taking my shoes off as I go through, the metal detectors and that type thing. But let me read you briefly some CDC numbers here. The number of people, Americans killed by jihadist immigrants, killed annually in the last 5 years is 2. All right? I'll skip some of the others. Lawnmowers are 69. Being hit by a bus, 264. Falling out of bed, 737. Being shot by another American, 11,737. Do we really need a war on terrorism? But like I said, this is not a political debate. So mass communication, what it does from a cultural critic's point of view is it perpetuates images. It perpetuates stereotypes. It gives you an image of the world around you. And it forms these ideas that people carry with them throughout the rest of their life. The ditzy blonde. You know that one, right? Blondes are silly. The African-American thug, the Islamic terrorist, the elbow patch wearing college professor. All these are stereotypes. And these are things that you expect to see, and they're born of the media. They're born of mass media. How do you know these things? You watch TV. You watch movies. And these are how you get the ideas for these things, right? Stuart Hall, one of my academic heroes, passed away a couple of years ago, but he called this the politics of image. He discusses representation, but more importantly, representation. If you break that word down, you can represent these 3 panelists sitting here at the table one-on-one, live, or I can shoot them on camera, change the camera angles, the lighting, whatever, and represent them in a completely different manner. I can put an image on this screen of a calm, serene beach with palm trees and calm water and that kind of thing, and everything is fine, and you're just loving it. I want to go there. But then all I have to add to it is dun 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 dun. Right? It represents that image. That's what we have to start recognizing. This is what's happening to us, right? Media gives us what Stuart Hall calls dominant and negotiated meanings and oppositional meanings. My findings in some of my research is these are by choice. You can choose the dominant meaning, the meaning that the media prefers you get. Or you can choose an oppositional meaning. Or you can negotiate it. I'm not sure what that means. I had grits for dinner last night. Well, the dominant meaning is, I love grits. They're good. The oppositional meaning is, no, the grits suck. The negotiated meaning is, what's a grit? Right? News coverage is no different than all this entertainment type stuff. News coverage, you have to excuse me, I'm chewing on cough drops here. News coverage works the same way. It perpetuates stereotypes just like entertainment television does. Look at the perp walk between an African-American person who was caught shoplifting something at Walmart and is going to court versus Bernie Madoff in a suit and tie who took billions of dollars literally from a number of different people, and on his way to the courtroom, he's presented on a sidewalk with his bodyguards in a suit and tie going into court. To me, that's interesting. At our university, we teach the dark days of journalism, the yellow journalism thing, and I think it's coming back. The difference is that we have a choice today. We've gone from 1 or 2 newspaper towns to cable systems that offer basically unlimited sources of information. But what you have to remember is these are corporate entities. All of these sources are corporate entities. And they have to maintain an audience. And this audience is what's sold to the advertisers. You, folks, are the product of mass media. The programming, the shows, if you will, are the raw materials that build the product. And the product is the audience, right? We don't write checks to Channel 6 or NBC or whoever to watch news, right? Who does? The advertisers. Are the advertisers writing checks to NBC to watch the news? No. The advertisers are writing checks for you. They're buying you. Well, what does that mean for mass media, and what does it mean for news? Doc talked about a number of different theories of journalism. There's also a corporate theory. There's the business theory. And the business theory says that the CEO of a news organization, of a media organization, of which there are very few now. It's a very, very highly concentrated business now. We call them, or I call them in my class, the 6 old white guys. These are the people who control what you know and what you don't know. That's almost as important as what you know. And it's a force of hegemony. That is to say, you listen to this stuff, you read it in magazines, you hear things on the radio, and it controls you to a certain degree. How do I know this? I know this because my wife and I were watching the homecoming parade in Murray a year or 2 ago, and we were watching floats go by. And the sorority floats went by. And we noticed that there, on each float, there were like 50 young ladies. And as these floats went by, there were 250 or 300 young ladies all wearing nearly identical brown boots. Did they all wake up one day and go, I need a pair of brown boots? Independently? No. Some unseen force told them to do that. This is actually addressed in A Devil Wears Prada. Have you ever seen that movie? Why are you wearing that color blue? Because the people in this room chose it for you a couple of years ago. You didn't choose it on your own. Same thing. Where'd the man bun come from? All of a sudden there are man buns everywhere. You can't tell me that 10% of the male population simultaneously decided they had to have a man bun. This came from somewhere, didn't it?
And Valentine and I are envious.
I wish I could have one, but I think we can agree that money is power, and cultural studies tells us that those with the money, those with the power, control the agenda. They control what we talk about. They control communication because they control media. We're talking about huge corporations, huge corporations. They control the imagery. They control how things are represented. political candidates. They control how political candidates are represented, don't they? The days of the whistle stop tours are gone. You can't, as a public, go to the train station over here and watch someone give a speech from the back of a train and then they go on. You can't do that. You have to depend on how they are represented. Are they being represented objectively in news media? And see, the point is, you have to look at this from a very agnostic point of view. You have to be willing to say, I don't know. I don't know if that's right. I don't know if he's being represented truthfully. Noam Chomsky referred to this as manufacturing consent. I can tell you something over and over again until you're eventually going to believe it. Mass media is a corporate entity. I'm going to cut this off really quick. Tony Schwartz, a number of years ago, by the way, he was the ghost writer for The Art of the Deal. Tony Schwartz, a number of years ago, said that there are 3 political parties, ABC, NBC, and CBS. Today, there are a lot more. I did some, the interesting thing is that it's not only network news anymore, it's satire, satire news. Part of my dissertation research was a questionnaire survey that went out to a bunch of 18 to 30-year-olds, for example. And there was a question on there that, and some of you are going to remember this from the 08 election cycle. There was a question on this survey that said, who said, I can see Russia from my front porch? Does anybody know the answer to that? Who said that? No, she didn't. Tina Fey said that. But 90-some-odd%, over 90%, more than 90% of my respondents said Sarah Palin. Further research showed that this demographic, 18 to 30 years old, got most of their political news, their political information about the candidates that they were going to vote for in the next election from Saturday Night Live, the Colbert Report, and Jon Stewart. That's a scary thing, all right? It's pop culture. It's pop culture journalism. The common thread, like I said, is media ownership, consolidation of media ownership. Media is now beholden to shareholders, not, as Doc was pointing out before, there is no right for the people to know. You don't have the right to know. They have the right to make money. And they do that through means of selective exposure. There are enough news sources out there now that you can choose a news source that fits your preconceived ideology. You can pick and choose. Without that ability, you would have cognitive dissonance. Anyone who watches MSNBC is not going to watch Fox. If they do, they would change the channel. Fox viewers are not going to watch MSNBC. If they do, they'll change the channel. When they change the channel, it's a revenue loss for that corporation. That's all I'm saying. All you have to, if you want truth in media, follow the money. That's how I'm going to sum this up. You just follow the money. Truth in media, I think, from my position, from a cultural critical position, is subjective. Truth is what you make of it. Everyone has their own truth. Bob?
Thanks, Tim.
Don't encourage him.
Never before has so much information been crammed into a mere 10 minutes.
Oh, and that's only half of it.
Well, it's twice as much.
In class, there's 40, I remember in class, there's 40 more minutes of that.
That's right.
Since Tim got to stand up, can I stand up too?
I wish you wouldn't.
Oh.
No.
You want a cough drop too?
Let me put
Ladies
this
and
in.
gentlemen, in case you
The
forgot-
only stand-up comedians are me and Bob. But you can sit or stand up.
I'm sitting down.
No,
Let the lawyer stand. Ladies and gentlemen, at the bar, this is Lawyer Qualls.
Thank you. It is such a privilege to speak in front of you tonight. And I want to tell you exactly what kind of privilege that it is. It's the privilege of 4 white dudes of a certain age getting up here to tell you what the truth is. So I do feel indeed privileged.
I'm younger than them.
Okay. And let me
They weren't
qualify
voting
that
then.
just
Yeah,
a
they
little
were.
bit before, more than that. The four white dudes up here of a certain age who are telling you about the truth, there's an attorney, there is an advertising man, there's a spin doctor, and Doc, what was your job in the military?
Propaganda.
Propaganda.
He's the spin doctor.
I thought I was
Todd,
a
you
spin
did a
doctor.
great job putting together this panel. And
I'm the critic.
okay. And Tim's a friend of mine. We're a colleague, and there's a running. Well, it's not really a joke. I mean it. I want rebuttal on every class you teach.
He was always invited to my political science classes.
If you would please, Bob Valentine, wrap me up before I go too long, because I want to have some time to argue with Tim a little bit. There are a few things he said I want to. I don't know about that. He said if you want to know about truth in media, follow the money trail, and I want to suggest maybe it's something else. You see, all of us want truth, but most of us aren't willing to be honest. Let's think about that for just a moment. It's really easy to point our fingers and say, look what Fox did, and look what CNN did, and look at that meme, and look at that. And I'm going to say, can we take a moment and can we look at ourselves? So here's a basic. Now, this isn't academic. This isn't really all that intellectual. It's maybe a little bit more spiritual, actually. Here's the idea. You cannot have what you are not willing to be. So if you want to have forgiveness, then you have to be a forgiving person. And if you want to have peace, you have to be a peaceful person. And if you want to have trust, you need to be trusting. And if you want to have truth, you must be truthful. I think that might be an interesting place to start. So let's begin examining this by examining ourselves and looking at our media habits. What is it that we consume? Where do we go? Thank you, Todd. We have our pet websites that we go to, don't we? Some of you, it may be the Drudge Report. Others, it may be salon.com. We have those memes that we look at that we go, yeah, 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 and others that just make us totally red-faced mad. And how many of you have been mad at somebody on the internet that you don't even know in real life? And let's be honest about where we go to get our news. Do you actually go to a news outlet, or is it something that showed up in your Facebook feed that came from some news source and you looked at that? And that's our consumption pattern. So let's think about this a minute. A couple questions I'd like for you to ponder. Are you in an echo chamber where the worldview that you prefer is what you are exposed to all the time? When is the last time that you read objectively an opinion that is opposite of your own? When is the last time that you read something? Now, you are obviously an educated and thinking room. So when I say you, let's apply that to the world at large, okay? I'm not picking on you guys. What does it mean to you that some people are called deplorables and other people are called snowflakes? Do we see that? We see that in our media and in our social media, and we see that reported. Have you ever watched a congressional meeting or maybe a presidential address on C-SPAN? You know, the idea of watching it without someone telling you what it means, but you watch it yourself so that you can, with your own mind, say, what is the truth of this matter without having some anchor tell you what someone just said. I think that how we pursue media and what we look at might be a better way to pursue the truth. Are you willing to see things differently? And I think before we can see things differently, we need to let go of this binary way that we look at everything. It's this or it's that. So the underlying lie is that there's this or that. Republican or Democrat, left or right, snowflakes or deplorables, Coke or Pepsi, Star Trek or Star Wars, Northern or Southern, Mac or PC. I like Mac. So what is your tribe, and what do they tell you that the truth is? So we've got to get beyond this binary thought. Now, there was a policy that the Federal Communication Commission had for some years called the Fairness Doctrine. Maybe you've heard of it. It's since been abandoned. And the idea was they required broadcast stations to give time to discuss both sides of controversial issues, as if there are only two sides to the issue. And isn't that what we see on television now? We find someone from the far left, someone from the far right, we get them arguing with each other, someone is a moderator, and we televise this and think we're going to end up with an informed electorate. I don't think it works that way. There are more than two sides, but just for a moment, let's pretend that there are just two. It should be easy. We're always talking about having a bipartisan solution, right? So if you are someone who is on the left and you go all the way to the left, you only have to defend yourself from the right. And if you're someone who is politically all the way to the right, you only have to defend your opinion from this side. If you're in the middle, if you are a thinking and independent person who says, I want to know the truth of this matter, then you have to defend yourself on every side. That is a very uncomfortable position to be in. So, and I think that sometimes we're led into this, and let's talk a little bit about some mass communication theory. And this is one that came out by a German political scientist. Her name was Elizabeth Noel Newman. Back in 1974, she was trying to figure out, how did Joseph Goebbels do this? How did the Third Reich come about? How did the Nazis, how did this happen? How did this message get out that people believed it and thought this was true and something to do and something to act on? And she came up with something she called the spiral of silence theory. And it works kind of like this. If a few people say something loud enough and repeatedly and long enough, and other people don't say anything at all, and that's the message that you hear and hear and hear, you can come to the conclusion that everybody else thinks this thing and I'm in the minority. And the truth of the matter is, it may be that a majority of the people don't think that way at all. They have just become silent. I think that a lot of us probably have a lot more to agree about than we really do, but the news isn't presented to us that way, is it? So this idea of the spiral of silence was something, well, Nixon picked up on it. Maybe you remember the great silent majority that he talked about. Well, he used it for political cause, but I think there might be a great silent majority. So the next point, and this is quick, and then I want to sit down. I think that we've made the problem of pursuing facts instead of pursuing truth. If you look at it on the news, we count things, don't we? We like that hard data. How many lies did the president say today? They look at that. They count them. How much did Amazon pay in taxes? What's the infant mortality rate, literacy rate, miles per gallon, carbon footprint? These are all things that we can measure, and they're facts, and we talk about facts. Here is a really old-fashioned idea. Facts are not an end to themselves. Rather, facts should be used as evidence to help us discover the truth. And if we could bring back that idea, if once again academia could bring back the study of rhetoric, where we can make principled arguments that we're not going to say, okay, I love that snarky meme. I know it's a red herring. I know it's an ad hominem attack. I know it is some sort of fallacy of logic, but it says what I want to say, and it's a delicious morsel, and then you repost it. I think it starts with us not to do that anymore. So Dr. Vance just said, follow the money, that's where it is. And I think there might be something to that idea in that media gives us what we want. That gives us what we ask for. And we consume these lies. And we like them. We go for that thing. It's that sugary, sweet thing that we want to consume. There's a lot of pornography in this country. Do you know why? It's a multi-million-dollar industry. That's why. There's consumers for it. There's a lot of lies in our news and stories that are told. And you know why? There is a market for it. So the media gives us what we want. I suggest that we start wanting some better things.
I'm going to give you a break. I'm going to sit down. Also gives me a break. And I'd like to play a card from my hand that goes back beyond the time when I was aware of things like cognitive dissonance and social effect, modeling theory, social learning theory, and the stuff that I talk about in classrooms now. I like to go back to the days when I actually thought at some point I might be able to earn a living teaching history. That was a dream of my youth. It did not last long because I did some research. And I actually aspired to more money than that. So I changed my degree program into one that ironically paid even less. But we learned, don't we?
But it's fun.
Yes, it's great fun. There's a lot of data out there. I'd like to talk with you just for a minute about the challenge of the gatekeeper. You've heard that term a couple times this evening, I believe. Those are the people who are responsible for saying, yes, we're going to put this out in the public media. We're going to put this in the stream, the social stream that will reach a number of people in our society. The gatekeepers can say, no, we're not letting that out. An example that comes immediately to mind is the National Enquirer that gets hold of a story and says, we think we'll keep this to ourselves for purely platonic and highly principled reasons. All of which will fit neatly into our Swiss bank account. But the gatekeeper says, I'm not letting this out. In some cases, the gatekeeper says, I am letting this out. We make those decisions. Who makes those decisions and why? That's what Tim and Kevin have been talking about. Tim says the decisions are made for money, and Kevin says, yeah, now whose fault is that? Or what can be done about it? I'd like to take you back in history to a time when the truth, for one brilliant moment, or maybe 6 to 8 years, really mattered. And that is a little over a century ago, say 110, 112 years ago, when the term muckraker was invented by Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt came to office as a Republican president, but Roosevelt's ideas were very progressive. Roosevelt laid the groundwork for Woodrow Wilson, the first Democrat president in decades. How could Roosevelt, a Republican guy, have laid the groundwork for a Democrat president? Roosevelt had a lot of the same ideas that Wilson liked. His party did not necessarily share that opinion. Roosevelt needed help to persuade people that he should be voted for and his program should be endorsed. He was counting on the voters to communicate their desires on specific legislative items to the legislators and persuade them to back Roosevelt's plan. He was pretty successful. But he would not have succeeded at all, and he said so on many occasions, without the media. He depended on people like Ida Tarbell, who wrote a long series in McClure's magazine about the monopoly that was Standard Oil, how it became a monopoly and how it manipulated agricultural prices and oil prices to the benefit of Standard and its friends. Ida Tarbell, probably the first best known, with the possible exception of Nellie Bly, who was a real person, even if that wasn't her real name. One of the first best known women journalists who set a high standard. Ray Standard Baker, who was invited into the White House to talk to Roosevelt before he initiated legislation because Ray Baker had done the research, had gathered the facts. Lincoln Steffens, who went into the homes of workers and the workplace and said these working conditions are inhuman. If owners will not fix them on their own, then government must intercede. Baker, Upton Sinclair, who wrote the expose on the food preparation industry and what a threat it was to human health, and William Allen White, the bard of Emporia, who wrote simple, straightforward editorials that reflected the view of all those people out west, that the people needed help. These journalists produced hard facts that took years to amass. Thank goodness they were supported by people like S.S. McClure, by Collier's Magazine, American Magazine, which was a spin-off of McClure's. They were supported by publishers who felt that the facts, the truth, and the welfare of the people were enough to risk being wrong, and thereby losing their audience, closing the magazine, going bankrupt. They would risk that for what they perceived to be the truth. Notice I didn't say it was the truth, it's what they perceived. Those people are remembered today. Tarbell, Baker, Stephan, Sinclair, White, they are remembered as the Muckrakers because the historians have called them, the era of the Muckrakers. They made a difference. They changed the course of government, and they changed the relationship between media, government, business, and the people. Roosevelt, they say, called them the Muckrakers, but if you read history carefully, you'll find out he did not. It was after those hardworking journalists had made a big difference in our society that Roosevelt referred to a different kind of journalist. These people he called the Muckrakers. The term actually comes from Pilgrim's Progress, John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. There is a man, Bunyan wrote a couple hundred years before Roosevelt, that the pilgrim runs into a man who is raking the muck of the world. He has a muck rake. He's looking for something in the muck. He is offered a crown of immortality, but he never looks up to see the crown or to ascent. He just keeps raking the muck. That's what he does. Roosevelt called the reporters who came after that great quartet from McClure's Magazine, who were looking for sensational exposés where the facts may have been weak, may have been lacking, where lies may not have been sought to be verified and rejected, but because the lie added to the story, it was included. Those people, people who sought sensationalism for the sake of sensationalism to increase readership in a magazine, those were the muckrakers, not the people who devoted years to finding facts and the objective, social, sometimes not so objective truth. They were journalists. Roosevelt consulted them, he had faith in them, he depended upon them. The muckrakers were just out to sell magazines. At one point, Roosevelt said, sometimes once we have determined the truth, maybe we should let it go. Once we've found out what's wrong, maybe we should stop talking about it and just fix it.
You know, Bob, you started your comments talking about the gatekeepers and that gatekeeping function of who decides what gets published and what doesn't get published, I believe has changed. I don't think that this is really a relationship anymore between journalism and government and people. I think we have to put the corporations in there. When I teach media law, there's a section about government control of media or government control of information. I think it's time to put together a whole new segment about corporate control of that communication. I just recently returned from a conference of the ABA, the Forum on Communication Law. And it was a great time, sitting around a table, and someone says, you know, hi, I'm the general counsel for HBO, and I'm the general counsel for NBC, and like, hi, I teach media law at Murray State. But while there, the general counsel for the New York Times said this. She said, the brand value of being the New York Times doesn't mean much anymore if people are going to read our stories. If people are going to read our stories, it's because a friend posted our story, and it's because of who their friend is. And what their research is saying is Washington Post, New York Times, the tabloids, it makes no difference. If your buddy posted this story, that's the reason that you read it too. So what that means is all of you are gatekeepers now. We're all gatekeepers. So we see the information and we make a decision. Are we going to repost on it? Are we going to comment on it? And how and why? And so we have gatekeepers there. And then the other gatekeepers are people like Mark Zuckerberg. And so the attorney for Facebook was there too, and was astounded, saying, here's what's amazing. Our policies, the policies that Facebook makes, has more to do with the information flow in this country than the laws that regulate broadcasting and journalism and how that works. And they're a private company, so they're not bound by the First Amendment in the way that the government is. They don't have that constraint. And they're just a bunch of 30-somethings that made a nice little platform, and they're making the rules that end up how we get information, and they're astounded by it, and so am I.
Yeah, because they are not really the gatekeepers. Somebody opened the gate and posted something. Zuckerberg's people might be able to stop that from being disseminated very far, but they didn't come up with it. Wikipedia, how do those guys write all that stuff? The Wikipedia editors have no control over the content of Wikipedia. If you send them something and say, this is true information, I think you should publish this on Wikipedia, they will send it back and say, we can't. We are not allowed to do that. It's not ours, it's everybody else's. In short, to paraphrase Walt Kelly's very eloquent character, Pogo, we have met the enemy and he is us. Let me make this point.
Okay, you better hurry, because I have one to make now, too.
Oh, I bet you do. So does your
By the
daughter.
way,
When you said Dizzy
If you brought your
Blonde,
boat tonight, the lights are on.
they're,
Hear
they're-
that?
they're- we are the ones who put the stuff out there. I did a quick check today because I'm astonished at the extent to which the American people, as reflected on YouTube, which is the only thing of its kind, whatever you call that sort of a thing, that I pay much attention to. I'm still trying to figure out how many times do I have to search for automobile accidents before all the choices I'm given by YouTube are automobile accidents. I first found that out when I was trying to find out something about the Second World War, and I did some things about the battle against the Japanese in the Pacific, and pretty soon I had 17 choices of things about the Second World War. I said, this thing is reading my computer and saying, this guy wants to hear about the Second World War, let's give him some more. So I tried automobile accidents. Just this morning I tried automobile accidents, and I never could fill all the choices with automobile accidents, but one of the many I got talked about fails. Somebody spends a lot of time putting videos of wrecked automobiles and the actual accidents themselves on YouTube. Here's the title of the last one I looked at. Idiot Drivers, Epic Driving Fails Compilation 2018, number 797. Somebody put it out there.
Or
It wasn't YouTube.
something.
Or
Because
something.
because a couple of weeks ago at that same conference, the attorney at LinkedIn, or not LinkedIn, Twitter, said that more than 38% of their accounts they know are bots, are not even people. And then beyond that, the network people are saying that in calendar year 2017, that more than 16% of those bot stories found their way into regular journalism channels. They weren't people, they were bots, and they've traced it back to a few IP addresses, and they would send out something that would say this, and then they had a meme that says that, and all of it was designed to make us do this.
Well, and that's the point I wanted to make is Bob, my esteemed colleague, says that we are all gatekeepers as far as social media goes, so Facebook. And I put forth the idea that we're not, because I don't get things, again, just like selective exposure theory says, as far as my choice of television news sources to receive, the algorithms in Facebook make sure that I only get information that fits my ideology. I don't get things on Facebook that are counter to my ideology. Why? I'd turn Facebook off. And they too are a corporate entity selling advertising space. Again, folks, follow the money. News?
Get a question.
Go ahead.
I think in this connection, everybody in here that's interested in what we're talking about ought to see the movie Brexit. Anybody else besides me seen it?
Yeah.
It talks about Cambridge Analytica, which is an organization that uses all the things you all just talked about.
Big data analytics.
And probably caused England to vote to get out of
Right.
the EU. Cambridge Analytica, if you've been following what's going on in this country in the last 2 or 3 years, very much, and even in the news this week, again, about that whole issue. So to see that movie, a lot of what we're saying here tonight,
Absolutely.
besides Benedict Cumberbatch, is just incredible. Even though he's got a name that's hard to say.
Good point.
What we have for sources of information today, we talk about all these infinite number of sources we have on television, for example, cable news stuff, but we have these 3 or 4, as it were, primary networks, Fox, NBC, ABC, CBS, and then we have this plethora of other cable news sources. They're all corporate entities, and they all cultivate the product the same way. The product, again, being you people. And this is what they're selling. The idea of being a CEO in corporate America, correct me if I'm wrong here, is to reduce cost, increase profits, and in turn, increase shareholder return, right? The days of going into a newsroom and there being, and Doc remembers these days, you go into the newsroom and there's 100 reporters sitting behind 100 typewriters, typing 100 stories and competing, literally competing on a daily basis for space in the newspaper. Those days are gone. We know what that image looks like because of Superman, ironically. Most of you have never been in a newsroom back then, but we know what that looks like because of mass media, right? Today, newsrooms have been cut to the core. Boom. Woodward and Bernstein's efforts could not exist today because no one would finance months of investigative journalism to turn out one major story at the end of it, right? So that's part of the problem. So the shrinking newsroom is being replaced
Citizen journalism.
No, I'm talking about in broadcast journalism, and this is the sad thing, because this is kind of what I teach, and it kills me. But press releases, because now this promotional, this corporate promotional piece that looks like a news story is taken verbatim and printed in a newspaper, or an electronic version of this is taken and then just aired on television. And if you think I'm kidding, think about the last time you saw a news story about a new drug being approved by the Food and Drug Administration. It's going to cure this, it's going to fix this, it has none of the side effects, it has none of the testing that was done on it in the story, nothing, but the imagery shows the little machines going around with the bottles and the pills being dropped into them and the tops being screwed on and all that kind. You've seen this, right? There's not a news bureau in the world that was allowed in that clean room. That's a sterile environment that they're creating those drugs in. Where did that come from?
Well, Tim, a lot of those news stories aren't even written by people anymore either.
Exactly.
Because with a lot of AI, particularly sports stories.
It's not objective news. If it's not objective news, how can there be objective truth?
Well,
that's where we're at today.
You were talking about following that money trail. If you follow that money trail, it'll take you back to one of 5 pockets. According to the Columbia Journalism Review, more than 90% of the information flow in this country ultimately goes through only 5 corporations. And it's like that little Russian nesting dolls, you know, inside the other. And the biggest of which is Comcast, which owns everything.
Question, yeah.
I was going to ask you if there was a national platform that could be created or we could have to have a voice. And you almost answered already. You're saying maybe it's our consumption.
What was it they used to have?
I think so. I think anything you subsidize, you get more of.
But
And so if we continue to subsidize this.
But Kevin, what was it they had back? They disbanded the thing, but you could go there with it. It was a national platform. It had media people, media supported in it. And if you had a liable situation or something and you couldn't resolve it at that level, you could go to this national forum. But nobody went to it much. They went away with it. But that was the only one I remember. Janet, do you remember the name of it? What was it called? Yeah. Well, it was supposed to be a big thing for about 2 years, and it died.
The platform now, there's a group called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, and they do a lot to try to preserve the rights of people in this new media age. And they're involved in a lot of, you can kind of think of them as the ACLU for media consumers. And so it's not really a platform, but that is one organization, and that's a website you might check out because they have a lot of initiatives.
Yeah, and notice that we're not, the problems do not stem from what we would consider to be the traditional media. We're not complaining about
Well, they
a
do as
local
far as I'm
newspaper.
concerned.
Well, I know, but I'm not concerned about that. I'm not the one who looked at his daughter and said, "Dizzy blondes."
It's
heard you
just,
say that.
it's a stereotype that's media perpetuated.
Yes.
But can I add this?
Sleep well.
This Cortez woman is going to replace the blondes for those jokes.
Yeah, it's true.
Single-handedly, she can do it.
Just hope
She
it's
said the guy was
politically correct.
bilingual in 3 languages.
Three.
That's a Yogi Berra, isn't it?
I thought it was too, but they give her credit for
I
it.
think in the final analysis, when we look at the local newspaper, the local TV station, the local radio station, we look to those media for facts. What's the weather going to be like? Not in Boston. I don't care what it's going to be in Boston tomorrow. I care what it's going to be in Keville. I care what it's going to be in Benton. I
How
care
about
what it's.
Goslow?
I don't care about Goslow. That's not really a town anyway. Goslow. I
Oh,
keep telling you.
okay, I saw that sign.
It's not a
Go
town.
low.
Go slow.
Yeah.
Goslow.
Oslo.
Told me it was right next to the Donut Pass. I said, no, that's
Yeah.
not right either. We depend on the local
Slow
media,
sugar.
and generally we can. But when the local media find their advertising revenues drop because people say, I ought to put all my money into online promotion, then where do they find the money to hire the reporters to double fact check? Well, like the burning rails, we have a picture. I don't think we're going to show that. You probably saw it a few days ago when Chicago had that brutal cold and they set fire to the railroad tracks. You see that?
Yeah.
NBC carried it, CBS carried it, WTVF out of Nashville carried it. I don't know if it was on PSD. A lot of people carried the burning rails. They set the rails on fire. You can't burn that stuff. It's steel. It won't burn.
But you have to ask your question
And
about
they didn't.
why.
They didn't set them on fire. Nobody set the rails on fire. What the shot was, the video was of a switch yard near Chicago. Those switches, which move big, heavy steel tracks, steel does not freeze at 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It's already pretty stiff at room temperature. Those switches are burning because they have propane gas feeds underneath them, and they are specifically designed to keep the switches from freezing when it gets that cold, so the trains can select the right track. The rest of the rails, let them go ahead and freeze. It's already pretty tough stuff, steel. You've probably seen some of it. Nobody called the railroad and said, hey, why'd you guys set the tracks on fire? That's uncommon. Had they done so, somebody said, the tracks aren't on fire. That's a little propane we put on the switches to heat them up. Nobody fact-checked the video that everybody played. Who would fact-check such a thing? I believe that person is called a journalist. There's a difference between a journalist and a content provider. We don't have enough journalists. We got plenty of content providers, and sometimes the very people who would rather use journalists are forced to accept content that came from goodness knows where. They don't have time to check it, and they don't have the budget to check it. Is that because corporations only care about the bottom line? I'm sure it goes beyond that, but that's as far as I can get. Yes, ma'am.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts about NPR, BBC.
With who? From a cultural criticism standpoint, or?
back to the social responsibility theory, what that commission came out with, it said that when the media do not fulfill its obligations as it should, government can provide it, and NPR, CPB, Voice of America. However, some of the people that they've hired have given it a left-leaning slant to it. And if you watch NPR News or listen to it, I mean, in the mornings or afternoon, all things considered, it's very featurey. It's gotten to be so much featurey, it's not much news per se. You know what I'm saying? If you've listened to WKMS at our place over there, it's a lot of soft stuff and not much hard news, which is where it was supposed to have gone and provide hard news that the regular media weren't providing or didn't have time to provide.
But Doc, you've got to admit, they have an advantage. PBS,
They don't have,
They don't have a
NPR,
budget.
they have an advantage.
Yeah,
They
they
don't
do.
have to make money. They can get by with a small audience, so they can afford the truth.
But the issue is, it's still a gatekeeping issue. That you talked about the burning rails, and my question is why? I mean, the fact of the matter is that the who, what, why, where, when of the hard news story is not interesting anymore to the vast majority of the news viewing public, and editorializing is of interest, but pop culture is of more interest. And how do I know this? Is because I can go into a classroom full of undergraduate students, and I've done this actually, this is not conjecture, and not only can they not tell me who Brett Kavanaugh is, because even though he was just in the news, they can't tell me who the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is either, but they can tell me every sibling's name of the Kardashian family. Now here's the power of mass media. I know the name Kardashian, and I don't know why.
I thought for years they were the sworn enemy of the Klingons.
I don't know why I know that name.
yeah.
But that's the power of mass media,
That's it.
to teach me to control my environment, to control my world.
What we talk about, and it's probably a good time to quote the late Mike Royko, who was a great newspaper
love Mike
columnist at the
Royko.
Chicago Tribune.
Tribune.
He said, it has been my policy to view the internet not as an information superhighway, but as an electronic asylum filled with babbling loonies. And if some
sounds
people say, that's a relief from reality, I think I'll watch some more babbling loonies. That explains why you know something about the Kardashians and why all of us may know some things we really don't need. It's not
Let me
useful
make
to us
a
at all.
comment there again. Thinking about the NPR, one of the things that's changed, I used to be in charge of the CP Grant Murray for WKMS, and when I took it over in '77, we had about 65% of the total revenue for the station paid for by the grant. Currently, it's less than 20. And so now these NPR stations, local ones, have to cater to the thing and do a lot of fundraising, twice a year go begging, even the KET and all of them, because more and more they depend upon the locals to do it, and therefore, if the locals give, they want to have a say, right? And so they're losing that thing that originally set them up, was to provide alternative, less and less, I think.
But as Kevin and Tim have pointed out, there is a driving force here, and it is economic. If you watch PBS all the time, and you get a large number of people to watch PBS and listen to NPR, the money will follow the numbers. As a nation, what are we watching? I can tell you. We're watching Dancing with the Stars, we're watching The Voice, we're watching America Thinks It Has Talent, we're watching reality shows.
Yeah.
We watch reality shows. We watch reruns of old films. That's what we want,
We're
and that's what
reducing
they
this-
give us.
Reducing programming quality and increasing profits. It's the corporate,
Lowest common denominator.
it's American corporate structure. Right, a race to the lowest common denominator.
If it works,
Let me
it
give you a couple of words here. Honey Boo Boo. Really? People watch this for multiple seasons.
And
I
it
can't figure
halted
that one out.
Three
immigration.
questions back there.
We got a question back here,
At
Matt.
the girl.
I wonder if maybe you could talk a little bit also about the role of different technologies in shaping our perception of reality and this sort of idea that began with Marshall McLuhan and Postman also talks about, particularly with the emergence of the internet,
go.
Yeah,
things
I
to
think,
do with
yes.
sound bites and how we raised a generation in television and internet.
You got him.
That's excellent, yeah.
Very simplistic.
That's a very excellent point, and what we have footage of is what is given the most time. So if hundreds of thousands of people perish in China and we don't have footage to show that, it'll be a talking box over the shoulder and given 10 seconds. But something that we have a whole lot of footage of, like burning train tracks, will get a whole lot more time. And I really appreciate your mentioning Neil Postman. I really liked his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. And I think, he wrote that one in the 80s. And now I'm thinking, oh my goodness, everything he said, we are amusing ourselves to death, and we know who the Kardashians are, but most people can't name who their legislators are.
Right.
And so we have that problem too. So yes, I think the technology is giving shape, but more than that, I think it's the legal environment too, and how the legal provisions for that technology. So for better or for worse, in public policy, lies are legally protected in a couple of different ways. So we have truth in advertising laws. So you can't make unsubstantiated claims in advertising unless you're a politician. You can't have false advertising unless it's a political ad. If it's that hybrid, then that political speech is allowed even if it's a lie. And on the internet, this is perpetuated in that if you have a news story that's online, so let's say that West Kentucky Star has a news story, and there's a place under that story where people can comment. If someone posts something there, West Kentucky Star has no legal liability for what anyone posts to a news story. Now that's not just them, it's any internet service provider. And this is called Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act. So what happens, the practice that can happen is that journalists go back and say, here's the story that I wrote. And their editor's like, hey, this part of it, man, don't put that on. We're not sure about that. We haven't checked our sources. Don't include that in your story. Reporters, okay, they post a story. Reporter then goes and posts a comment with a false name under their own story to put the information in that the editor said don't. And so this practice happens a lot, and there's a legal protection for it. And if it's a comment to a news story, then it may be good public policy. Maybe we have more speech, because otherwise they probably say, we're not going to have user comments to any news stories because we don't want the legal liability. But it's statutorily taken off the shelf, and then some of these things are unfortunate consequences.
The nature of the medium means that the nature of truth has changed, the determination of truth. At one time we would try to say, where are the facts? Does this assertion line up with the facts? That's the truth. Now, the bots, the algorithms that say this is valid are based not on objective truth, because bots can't do that. They're based on frequency. So if a thing shows up again and again, it is true. That's why an artist who read his own biography on the Wikipedia and said, that's not the day I was born, nor is it the city of my birth, he went into Wikipedia and changed it. You can do that. It always frightens me when librarians say, let me show you about Wikipedia. Let's change this. Lincoln died on December 31st, 1932. As a historian, that freaks me out. But the librarians will say, don't worry, somebody will see that within 5 minutes and change it back. And it always happens that way. I worry about the guy who looked up Lincoln in the second minute, though, and said, well, I thought he was older than that. Well, there you have it.
Another
It's
question,
based
Becker.
on frequency. Paul Reiser is dead, except he's not. But on Wikipedia, he's been dead over and over again, and people saw it one place, and then it was corrected, and they came back and killed him again. John Seigenthaler, a famous journalist out of Nashville, Tennessee. Seigenthaler was involved in the death not only of John Kennedy, but also of Robert Kennedy. Although he had nothing to do with it, that was in Wikipedia for over 4.5 months before it could be gotten rid of. Why? If it shows up a lot, it must be true. It's the ultimate Jeffersonian democracy. The voice of the people is the voice of God. So if it comes up again and again,
Go to the
it's
back.
going
When a
to be
story
true.
becomes legend, repeat the legend.
Didn't Seigenthaler file suit and management Wikipedia placed taking precautions now so that this sort of thing will not happen? Does it have to pass some sort of an editorial review process before it's posted?
Sort of, yes. There's supposedly about 20,000 editors who are supposed to check that. Unfortunately, that's like having 3 cooks for a dinner of 8,000 people.
But let me address that.